I was so sure she was my daughter, until the DNA test revealed something shocking. He had the perfect life with his family until a question started eating away at everything. His youngest daughter, blonde with blue eyes, looked so different from him, a black man. The DNA test was done, and the truth was devastating. But the secret his wife had kept for years was even more shocking. Dive into a story packed with raw emotion, intense conflicts, and twists that will keep you hooked from start to finish. Subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell to stay updated and never miss these stories. Our home was the beating heart of our family. Me, Marcos, my wife, Carla, and our 3 kids, Eduardo, Sofia, and Rebecca, built a life that was chaotic yet full of love. Between laughter, playful teasing, and the occasional shout to restore order, our house was a place where anyone could feel the warmth of our bond. The living room was always a mess, scattered with toys, pillows out of place, and Rebecca's drawings spread all over the table. During meals, the table buzzed with lively conversations. But deep down, something had begun to quietly gnaw at me. Our youngest, Rebecca, was different from the rest of us. From the moment she was born, her appearance sparked comments. She had porcelain white skin, blonde hair that shimmered in the sunlight, and deep blue eyes that seemed to hold a secret. While Carla, our 2 older kids, and I were black with strong features and curly hair, Rebecca looked like she belonged to another story entirely. At first, we laughed off the remarks. Genetics works in mysterious ways, Carla would say confidently with a smile. She's just special, that's all. But as time passed, the curious looks from others began to affect me. Some were simply admiring Rebecca's beauty, but others carried something more. Veiled insinuations and innocent questions that planted tiny seeds of doubt in my mind. One neighbor once remarked, "She doesn't look anything like you, Marcos. Are you sure there wasn't a mix-up at the hospital?" Carla always brushed off these comments with humor, but for me, each one left a sting. I tried to push those thoughts aside, but they crept back at the worst times. Rebecca was my daughter. I knew it. She was loving, full of life, and she adored me. Every night, when I tucked her into bed, she'd hold my face with those tiny hands and say, "Good night, Daddy. I love you." That should have been enough, shouldn't it? But some nights, I'd find myself just watching her sleep, searching her face for something, anything, that tied her to me. Her hair, her eyes, her skin felt impossible. The doubts I thought were only in my head started spilling into the kids' lives. One afternoon, Eduardo, our eldest, came home looking upset. He dropped his backpack on the floor and sat at the kitchen table without a word. "What's wrong, son?" I asked, concerned. He hesitated like he was carefully choosing his words. At school, the kids said Rebecca isn't really our sister, that she was adopted or, I don't know, that she belongs to another family. His voice was heavy with confusion and sadness, and it hit me like a punch to the gut. That evening, I shared what Eduardo said with Carla. She listened silently, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. When I finished, she looked at me and said, "Marcos, you're letting other people plant doubts in your head. Rebecca is our daughter. That's all that matters." Her tone was firm, but there was something different in her eyes. A flicker of worry she couldn't hide. I asked her outright, "Have you ever wondered? Has it ever crossed your mind that she might not be my biological daughter?" Carla took a deep breath and shook her head. "Never," she said, but her voice carried a fragility that made me question her words. "Are you telling me you don't trust me, Marcos? After everything we've been through, I tried to explain that it wasn't about trust. It was about the doubt that was consuming not just me, but our kids too. She looked away, clearly hurt, and said, "If this is what it takes to give you peace, then let's do the test. But I want you to know, Marcos, that to me, Rebecca is our daughter. Whatever the DNA says won't change that." The next day, I scheduled the DNA test. I thought making the decision would bring me relief, but instead, it did the opposite. Every time I looked at Rebecca, I felt a weight on my chest. She played in the yard with Sophia, laughing as if her world was perfect. How could I doubt a child so full of love? And yet, I couldn't shake the question. Eduardo and Sophia started picking up on the tension between Carla and me. During dinner, Eduardo asked, "Are you two fighting?" I tried to brush it off, but Sophia, always the more perceptive one, said, "It's about Rebecca, isn't it? Because she's different." Carla and I exchanged glances, and in that moment, I realized the test wasn't just about finding my own peace. It was about protecting our family. The days leading up to the test were long and filled with anxiety. The night before, I sat alone in the living room, a knot in my throat. I picked up one of Rebecca's drawings from the table. Our family, drawn with childlike simplicity, all holding hands. At the center, she had drawn herself with yellow hair and big eyes. Next to her, she had drawn me with the widest smile. And in that moment, I asked myself, what if the truth changes everything? Is it worth knowing? When we finally collected the samples for the DNA test, I felt a strange mix of relief and fear. The clinic was simple, but the silence inside made my anxiety louder. Rebecca found the whole process amusing. She even giggled when the swab brushed against the inside of her cheek. "Is this a game, Daddy?" she asked, smiling, completely unaware of the weight behind that small act. Carla stood beside me, silent, her hands clenched into fists by her sides, as if bracing herself for a storm. The results would take 10 days, but it felt like an eternity. During that time, I tried to act normal, but the tension at home was undeniable. Every time Rebecca approached me with her drawings or to play, I felt the heavy burden of guilt. She was so innocent, so full of love. Yet, the question continued to hammer in my mind. What if she's not my daughter? How would I handle it? Carla, on the other hand, seemed torn between pain and resolve. She kept the kids' routine intact, but when we were alone, the silence between us was suffocating. One night, as she washed the dishes after dinner, she broke that silence. "Do you think I cheated on you, Marcos?" she asked suddenly, her voice low, almost a whisper. I was caught off guard, but I tried to be honest. "I don't think you cheated, Carla, but what if something happened that even you don't know about? I'm not questioning your character. I'm trying to make sense of this doubt I can't shake." She sighed deeply, turned off the faucet, and faced me with tears welling in her eyes. "I just need you to know that, for me, it never made a difference. Rebecca is our daughter, Marcos. She always has been." Eduardo and Sophia started noticing something was off, despite our efforts to shield them. Eduardo, ever curious, began asking questions. "What's going on? Are you guys fighting because of Rebecca?" Sophia, more sensitive, would just watch me with a look that seemed to say she knew more than she let on. Rebecca, meanwhile, remained her usual cheerful self, oblivious to the storm brewing around her. One afternoon, while playing with her siblings in the yard, Rebecca ran up to me with a drawing in hand. "Daddy, look what I made." It was another drawing of our family, as she often did. This time, there was something different, a heart drawn around all of us. Because we love each other so much," she explained with that innocent smile that broke my heart. Deep down, I knew no answer in the world could change how we felt about her. But the test had already been done. There was no turning back now. On some nights, I'd sit in the living room, staring at the envelope that held the lab papers with the due date scribbled on it. It felt like that piece of paper had the power to destroy or save everything I held dear. Carla was suffering too, in her own way. One night, as we lay in bed, she finally said something that stuck with me. "Marcos, sometimes the answers we seek bring more pain than peace. Are you ready for whatever comes?" I didn't know how to respond. She continued, "I just need to hear one thing from you. Do you love Rebecca? No matter what?" I looked at her, and for the first time in days, I felt a wave of clarity. "Yes, I love her. I always will." She smiled faintly, but there was still something in her eyes, as if she wanted to say more but couldn't find the words. I thought about pressing her, but I decided it wasn't the right moment. Things were already tense enough. The days dragged on and the final day approached. When it came time to pick up the results, Carla suggested I go alone. "This is your journey, Marcos," she said, trying to mask her apprehension. I went to the clinic with my heart pounding. The envelope was ready, sealed, waiting for me. When I received it, it felt like it weighed a ton. On the drive back, I pulled over on a quiet street and just sat there, staring at that piece of paper. Should I open it now or wait until I got home? And you, what would you do in my place? Would you have the courage to open the envelope right then and there, or would you wait? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. This story is far from over, and the twists ahead will leave you speechless. I parked the car in front of our house, the envelope still unopened in my hands. My fingers trembled, and no matter how much I tried to convince myself I was ready, the truth was, I wasn't. The house was eerily quiet when I walked in. Carla was in the kitchen, stirring something on the stove, but the stiffness in her posture made it clear she knew what I had brought home. The kids were laughing and playing in the backyard, blissfully unaware of the weight hanging over our family. I set the envelope down on the living room table and just stared at it, like it was a ticking time bomb. Carla walked in slowly, drying her hands on her apron. "Did you open it?" she asked, her voice low but tense. I shook my head, unable to speak. She sat across from me, and for a moment, silence filled the space between us, the envelope acting as an invisible wall. "Marcos, before you open that, I need to say something," Carla began, her eyes locked on mine. "I know how you feel. I know you're scared of what's inside. But I need you to remember this. None of it changes who we are. Rebecca is our daughter. She always has been. She always will be." Her voice was steady, but there was a vulnerability beneath it that I couldn't ignore. I took a deep breath and picked up the envelope. My hands were clammy, and every second felt like it dragged on for an eternity. "I don't know if I'm ready for this," I admitted, my voice trembling. Carla placed her hand over mine. "You're not alone, Marcos. We're in this together." Her words gave me the courage I needed. Carefully, I tore open the seal and pulled out the paper inside, trying to steel myself for what I might find. The technical terms and numbers at the top of the document blurred together, but my eyes froze on the sentence that changed everything. "The genetic profile analyzed is not compatible with Marcos." I read it again and again, hoping it would somehow change. But it didn't. There was no mistake. Rebecca was not my biological daughter. My heart seemed to stop, and the world around me fell into a deafening silence. Carla was watching me, her eyes searching my face, trying to gauge the impact of those words. Finally, she broke the silence. "Now you know," she said softly, her voice barely audible. I looked at her, desperate for an explanation, something to make sense of this. "Carla, what does this mean? You knew this all along." My voice came out louder than I intended, unable to contain the emotions threatening to spill over. She took a deep breath, tears welling in her eyes. "Marcos, I already knew," she confessed, and those words hit me like a ton of bricks. Before I could respond, she continued. "It was years ago during a rough patch in our marriage. I made a mistake. I had an affair, but it was over as quickly as it started. When I found out I was pregnant, I believed Rebecca was yours. But when she was born, and I saw how different she looked, deep down I knew." My head was spinning, her words echoing in the void around me. "You knew, Carla. You knew all this time and let me live with this doubt. Why didn't you tell me?" My voice cracked, a mix of anger, pain, and confusion spilling out. "Because I was scared," she admitted, tears streaming down her face. "Scared of losing you. Scared you wouldn't be able to love Rebecca. I was wrong, Marcos, but I've always known she was ours, even if she wasn't yours biologically." I turned toward the backyard, where Rebecca was playing with Eduardo and Sofia. Her laughter carried through the walls, a painful reminder of her innocence in all of this. "She doesn't know, does she?" I asked, still staring out the window. Carla shook her head. "No, to her, you're her father, the only one she's ever known. And Marcos, you are her father. Biology doesn't make you any less of one." I stood up from the table and walked to the window, trying to process everything. Rebecca was running toward the swing set, her laughter filling the air as Eduardo gently pushed her. My mind was a storm of conflicting emotions. I knew I loved her, but the pain of betrayal and lies was suffocating. "I need some time," I finally said. Carla didn't try to stop me. She just nodded, as if she had expected this all along. The night I discovered the truth was the longest of my life. I sat in the living room until the early hours, unable to return to the bedroom and face Carla. The silence of the house was broken only by the soft sound of the children's breathing as they slept, and my heart felt like a stone in my chest. The words on the paper still echoed in my mind. "The genetic profile analyzed is not compatible with Marcos. Rebecca was not my biological daughter." That was a fact. But what did it mean? As the clock ticked on, my thoughts spiraled. I thought about all the moments I had shared with Rebecca, holding her for the first time in the hospital, her first steps, her first words. I thought about how she held my hand so trustingly when we walked together, like I was her safe harbor. And most of all, I thought about her smile, so full of love. She was my daughter. She always had been. But Carla? The weight of the secret she had carried all this time was something I wasn't sure I could overcome. By morning, Carla found me still in the living room. She looked exhausted, as though she hadn't slept either, but there was a strange calmness in her demeanor. "You slept here?" she asked, already knowing the answer. I just nodded. "Marcos, we need to talk. You have every right to be hurt, but I need to know. What are you going to do now?" I didn't have an answer. "I don't know, Carla," I admitted, avoiding her gaze. "I'm trying to process all of this. What you did. Keeping this secret. I don't know how to handle it." Carla sat down beside me on the couch, her presence heavy with emotion. "I never wanted to hurt you. I never wanted you to doubt the amazing father you are. That's why I kept the secret. Because deep down, I knew you were her father all along. Her words rang true, but they also stung. You took away my choice, Carla, I said, finally looking at her. You decided for me. You let this doubt grow inside me while you already knew the answer. That's not fair. Carla nodded, silent tears running down her cheeks. You're right, it wasn't fair. But I did what I thought was best to protect our family. The children woke up shortly after, and the conversation had to be paused. Eduardo and Sofia sensed the tension, but Rebecca, as always, came running to me with a huge smile on her face. "Good morning, Daddy," she said, wrapping her little arms around my legs. Instinctively, I knelt down to hug her back, feeling the pure, untainted love that only a child can give. As conflicted as I was, one thing was certain: nothing, absolutely nothing, could change how much I loved her. At breakfast, Carla tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy, but the kids knew something was wrong. Eduardo, always straightforward, asked, "Did you two fight again? Is it because of Rebecca?" Sofia looked at me, her big eyes full of worry. Before I could respond, Carla stepped in. "Kids, your dad and I are going through a tough time, but it has nothing to do with you. We're a family, and that's not going to change." Later, I decided to go out and clear my head. I drove aimlessly, trying to sort through my emotions. I passed places that marked my history with Carla. The restaurant where we had our first date, the park where we took Eduardo when he was a baby, the school where Sofia learned to ride her bike. Each memory felt like a bittersweet mix of joy and pain. Our marriage had been built on so much love, but now it felt like it was cracking under the weight of this revelation. I parked near a lake, a quiet spot where I sometimes brought the kids. Sitting on a bench, I tried to imagine my life without Carla, without our family as it was. Rebecca was my daughter that I was sure of, but the betrayal and the weight of the lies were suffocating. I knew I had to decide whether we would move forward together or take separate paths. When I returned home, Carla was waiting for me in the living room. Before I could say anything, she stood up. "Marcos, I know I made a mistake, but I don't want to give up on us. I don't want this mistake to define our family. I'm willing to do whatever it takes to rebuild your trust, but I need to know if you're still with me." Her voice was full of emotion, and for a moment, the weight of everything seemed to rest on that one question. The weeks that followed were an emotional endurance test. After that conversation with Carla, we decided we needed space but also unity. It was a difficult contradiction to balance. I was still hurt, but I knew I couldn't let it affect the kids, especially Rebecca. Carla respected my silence, but she made it clear through small gestures that she was willing to fight for our family. However, the world outside our home wasn't as understanding. The story about Rebecca somehow got out. I still don't know exactly how. Maybe an innocent comment from Eduardo or Sofia at school, or perhaps nosy neighbors picking up on the tension in our home. What mattered was that, suddenly, it felt like everyone was talking about us. One day, while I was shopping at the grocery store, I could feel people's eyes following me. At first, I thought I was imagining things, but then I heard someone whisper, "Did you know? His youngest daughter isn't really his." My blood boiled, but I decided to ignore it. I grabbed what I needed and went to the checkout, trying not to let my anger show. The kids started noticing something was wrong. One night, after everyone had gone to bed, Eduardo came to me. "Dad, why are people looking at us like that? The kids at school are saying weird things about Rebecca. Is it because of what I said that day?" His voice was heavy with worry and guilt. My heart sank at the weight my son was carrying. I sat down beside him and put my hand on his shoulder. Eduardo, listen to me. People are always going to talk. But that doesn't matter. What matters is that we're a family. We always have been and we always will be. Rebecca is your sister, and nothing anyone says can change that. He nodded but still seemed burdened with doubt. Then why do they talk? Why does everyone seem so curious? Before I could answer, Carla appeared in the doorway. Because some people can't accept what's different, Eduardo, she said, stepping into the room. But do you know what they can never take away from you? The truth. And the truth is that the love in our family is bigger than anything else. Her words were true, but even I knew they were easier said than lived. The following weekend, we decided to go to the park to try and bring some normalcy back to our routine. While Rebecca played on the swings and Eduardo chased Sofia across the grass, Carla and I sat on a bench. The silence between us was heavy, but she broke it first. People are talking, aren't they? She asked. I simply nodded, keeping my eyes on the kids. This is my fault, Carla continued, her voice low. If I'd been honest from the start, maybe none of this would be happening. I shook my head. It's not that simple, Carla. People would talk no matter what. The problem isn't what they say. It's how we handle it. She looked at me, surprised, as though she hadn't expected those words. Do you still think we can get through this? She asked. I don't know, I admitted, finally meeting her eyes. But I do know I don't want the kids to grow up thinking love depends on perfection. I want them to know mistakes can be overcome, that real families face things together. It was the most honest thing I could say in that moment. Carla smiled. A small, hesitant smile, but one filled with hope. When we got back home, I received a message from my mother. We need to talk, the text read. She was a strong woman who had always valued honesty above all else. I knew this conversation was inevitable, but my stomach turned at the thought of her judgment. That night, I lay awake, thinking about how I would explain the situation to her. More than ever, I realized that the fight for my family wasn't just internal. It was also against the harsh and unforgiving scrutiny of the world outside. The next day, I decided it was time to face my mother. Dona Helena had always been a woman of firm principles, and facing her critical gaze was almost as challenging as dealing with the judgment of the world outside. When I arrived at her house, she was in the kitchen, as usual, brewing coffee. The aroma was familiar, but the atmosphere felt heavy. Marcos, I'm glad you came. We have a lot to talk about, she said bluntly, handing me a cup. I sat at the table in silence, searching for the right words. My mother wasn't one to wait. So, is it true, she asked, looking me straight in the eye. This story going around about Rebecca? Her tone wasn't judgmental, but curious, as if she wanted to understand before forming an opinion. Still, the weight of her words was undeniable. Yes, Mom, it's true, I finally admitted. The DNA test showed that Rebecca isn't my biological daughter. The words came out heavy, each syllable carrying the weight of the past weeks. My mother took a deep breath, crossing her arms as she studied me. And Carla? She knew, she asked directly. I told her everything. About Carla's mistake, the secret she had kept for years, and how it had all affected me. As I spoke, my mother stayed silent, her gaze fixed on me, giving nothing away. When I finished, she finally spoke. Marcos, you know, I've never been one to sugarcoat things. Carla made a huge mistake. But let me ask you something. What do you want to do now? Are you going to let this mistake destroy your family? or are you going to fight for it? Her question caught me off guard. It wasn't judgment, it was a challenge. I don't know, Mom. I'm trying. I love Rebecca. I love my family. But this was a betrayal. She hid this from me for 5 years. My voice broke at the end, exposing the pain I still carried. My mother stood up and placed a hand on my shoulder. Son, sometimes the people we love the most make the hardest mistakes to forgive. But you have to decide if this mistake is bigger than the love you've built. Her words stayed with me the rest of the day. When I got home, Carla was on the couch with Rebecca asleep in her lap. She looked at me with a mix of relief and fear, unsure of what to expect. I sat down beside them and watched Rebecca sleep for a few minutes. Her peaceful face, her blonde hair spread across Carla's lap. She was the definition of serenity. I spoke with my mom today, I finally said. Carla tensed, bracing for the worst. She asked me what I'm going to do now, and to be honest, I still don't know. But one thing I'm certain of, I'm not going to let this situation take Rebecca away from me. Carla exhaled deeply, a sigh of relief, but before she could speak, I continued. We still have a lot to work through, Carla. My trust in you has been shaken, and that's not something that can be fixed overnight. I know, she said, her voice trembling, and I don't expect you to forgive me immediately, Marcos. I just want you to know that I'm willing to do whatever it takes to earn your trust back. For me, for you, and for our children, there was sincerity in her words, but also a heaviness. She understood the road ahead wouldn't be easy. That night, after putting the kids to bed, Carla suggested we start couples therapy. I know it won't fix everything right away, but maybe it'll help us handle this in a healthier way, she said. I hesitated at first, but knew that if I wanted to save our family, I had to be willing to try. I agreed, and we scheduled our first session for the following week. The weeks that followed were full of highs and lows. Therapy unearthed wounds I didn't even realize I had, but it also helped me understand why Carla had acted the way she did. I began to see that her fear of losing me was as deep as my pain from being betrayed. Slowly, we started to rebuild our trust. It wasn't easy, and there were still days when doubt haunted me. But with every smile from Rebecca, every laugh that filled our home, I felt we were moving in the right direction. Therapy was the first step toward rebuilding what felt irreparably broken. Carla and I went together, but the beginning was anything but easy. During the first session, I could barely look at her as we explained to the therapist what had happened. It felt strange to expose something so personal to a stranger, yet at the same time it was liberating. The therapist, a calm and empathetic man, encouraged us to be honest but also patient with each other. Forgiveness is a process, he said during one session. It doesn't happen overnight, and it can't be forced. But if both of you are willing, it's possible to rebuild what was lost. His words lingered in my mind. I knew I loved Carla, but the weight of the betrayal and the secret still loomed over us. On the other hand, every smile from Rebecca, every moment she ran into my arms, reminded me of what was at stake. As Carla and I worked to reconnect, the children also needed attention. Eduardo, being the eldest and most perceptive, started asking more direct questions. Dad, why are you and Mom acting so different? Are you going to split up? His voice carried a tone of fear, and it broke my heart. I held his shoulders and looked him in the eyes. No, son, we're going through a tough time, but our family is strong, and we love you all more than anything. Sophia, quieter and more reserved, started clinging to me and Carla more than ever. Sometimes, late at night, She'd show up at our bedroom door, asking to sleep with us. "Just for tonight, Daddy," she'd say with that look that was impossible to refuse. Rebecca, on the other hand, seemed blissfully unaware of the tension. She remained the same cheerful girl, drawing, singing, and lighting up the house with her presence. But I knew that, at some point, she too would sense that something was different. One afternoon, as we played at the park, Rebecca caught me off guard with a question. "Daddy, why have you been so serious lately?" She was sitting on the swing, looking at me with those bright blue eyes that always seemed to see right through me. I swallowed hard, searching for the right words. "I've just been thinking a lot, my love. But don't worry, I'm here, always." She smiled and said, "I love you, Daddy. You're the best in the world." Those words felt like a balm on my heart. As the weeks passed, I realized that therapy wasn't just helping us deal with the past. It was giving us tools to build a stronger future. Carla was making an effort to show, in every little way, that she was committed to regaining my trust. She was more open, more willing to talk about her feelings and listen to mine. Slowly, we began rediscovering what had brought us together in the first place: our love and our shared desire to be a family. The biggest change, however, came from within me. I realized I had been carrying the weight of betrayal like armor, protecting myself from the pain but also pushing away the people I loved. During one therapy session, the therapist asked, "Marcos, what do you think you need to let go of this burden?" I didn't have an immediate answer, but the question stayed with me for days. One night, as I watched Rebecca sleep, the answer finally came to me. I had to choose what mattered most: the past or the present. Rebecca might not have been my biological daughter, but she was my daughter in every way that counted. And Carla, despite her mistakes, was the woman I had chosen to build my life with. I couldn't erase what had happened, but I could decide how to move forward. I decided it was time for a fresh start. I gathered the family in the living room and spoke with complete honesty. "You all know we've been through some tough times, but I want you to know that nothing, absolutely nothing, can change how much I love you. We are a family, and that's what matters." The kids smiled, and Carla took my hand, her eyes brimming with tears of relief and gratitude. From that day on, we began to rebuild our lives with more strength and unity. Carla and I still had a long road ahead, but there was hope. Eduardo and Sofia started smiling again, and Rebecca continued to be the light that brightened our days. I realized that true love isn't perfect. It's tested, broken, and rebuilt, but it never stops being love. And what about you? Do you believe that love and dedication can overcome even the greatest challenges? Don't forget to leave your comment and subscribe to the channel for more heartfelt stories like this. Thank you for following along.